it was really hard. Honestly, it flipped everything on its head. Everything that I had been, kind of put my identity around was really my work and being able to accomplish things and feeling like I was capable. And then all of a sudden I was a new mom, and I pretty much overnight felt immense love for my daughter, but also felt totally inadequate in a way that I honestly had never felt, because it was just so many new things all at once.
That was Lisa Abramson. Lisa is a mom of 2 girls living with her husband in California. Lisa shares her postpartum story with us, and it's a heartbreaking one. With her firstborn, she suffered from the very rare postpartum psychosis, which impacts 1 in 1,000 moms. Losing touch with reality, Lisa ended up in the psychiatric ward for treatment. In this episode, we talk about how easy it is to lose our identities after becoming a mom, and we touch on the broken system of checks and balances for new mothers in the U.S. Welcome to the This Is Parenting podcast, a show devoted to sharing the roller coaster journey of parenthood from moms and dads all over the world. I'm your host, Andrea Rhodes. Information and show notes about today's episode can be found at thisisparentingpodcast.com. Let's get started.
So I'm Lisa Abramson, and I grew up in Menlo Park, California. It's in Silicon Valley, and I live here now with my husband and 2 daughters. When I had my first daughter, Lucy, we were living up in San Francisco, about an hour north of where my family is. So we were excited to, start a family. We've been married for a few years, and I had also decided I wanted to quit my job and start my own company. So I quit my job. I was a marketing executive. I just felt like I wanted to have a career and be a mom, but I knew the career that I was doing just wasn't going to be meaningful. I was, doing mobile advertising, selling things to people that didn't need more stuff. So that really lacked meaning. So I decided I was going to quit my job. I was going to try to start a company, and then we'd also try to start a family. And I figured, maybe heard from many people, oh, it's going to take a while, or you never know. It could take, 6 months. It could take a year. And a week later, after I quit my job, I was pregnant. Whatever, 5-6 weeks later, find out was like, oh, so that happened really quickly. So that was wonderful, beautiful. It was planned, but it was like, wow, this was really quick. So then I realized I had the deadline of January 1st. My daughter was due January 11th. I was like, okay, January 1st, I have to have my company started, or I've inadvertently committed career suicide. So I felt like I was kind of under the gun. Looking back, there's many things about me and my personality type. I'm an overachieving type A go-getter. I would say, I decide on something and I just nothing gets in my way. I charge forward. I figure it out. So that has a lot of upside, because when I set my sights on something, I achieve it. But also, I didn't know what I was getting into. I had no clue how much the sleep deprivation and the stress of being a new mom, not to mention the fact that, with a new baby at home, you don't get any gold stars. You don't know how you're doing. There's no yay, well done, good job. It was just a lot. It was really hard. Honestly, it flipped everything on its head. Everything that I had been, kind of put my identity around was really my work and being able to accomplish things and feeling like I was capable. And then all of a sudden I was a new mom, and I pretty much overnight felt immense love for my daughter, but also felt totally inadequate in a way that I honestly had never felt, because it was just so many new things all at once. And then my daughter wasn't gaining weight. She was having trouble breastfeeding. So she was just drinking the letdown milk, but wasn't drinking anymore. She was crying a lot, obviously, because she wasn't eating enough. So there was just all of these, stressors. And I just felt like pretty much from the get-go, I was a bad mom. I wasn't doing things well. It certainly wasn't what I imagined. And I was, rocking the post-mom birth bod. And that was it was rough for a few weeks. And then for me, unfortunately, it took a really deep nosedive from kind of sleep deprivation and stress to actually an emergency situation because I experienced something called postpartum psychosis. It's very rare. It's 1 in 1,000 new moms experience it. It's one of the rarest, thankfully, postpartum mood disorders, but it's the most severe. And if you experience it, it's a medical emergency because I basically snapped and lost touch with reality. I thought that there was snipers on my roof and there was this crime that had been committed that I was like going to get arrested for, but I didn't really do anything, but no one understood. I mean, I was in this entire alternate reality that felt as real as can be. That's the only way I can describe it. I knew something was off at times because sometimes I was back to reality, but I was scared and terrified, and I basically didn't sleep for 3 days, and that landed me in the psychiatric ward. Previously had no mental illness before, and obviously this is my first go, and thankfully last go in the psychiatric ward. Not a fun place, but thankfully, I recovered. There's a happy ending to the story. It was a lot of hard work. Many things helped me out, but I got better, gathered my strength, got back to work, and decided to have another baby, and thankfully had a much more positive experience with my second baby girl, who's now 16 months old.
So tell me a little bit about the period of time before the psychosis event happened. How old was your daughter when that actually happened?
Yeah, so I was hospitalized when she was 6 weeks old. So it kind of started about 5 weeks, which is really common actually with postpartum psychosis. Usually it happens in the first month after childbirth, because the rapidly changing brain chemistry after giving birth, you're like in this hormonal cascade, and that with the sleep deprivation and the stress can sometimes cause basically the first symptoms are confusion, and then it becomes full on kind of paranoia sometimes and the psychosis. But the confusion at first started innocently enough. I thought, I couldn't figure out how to put my breast pump parts together, but I had pumped like 1,000 times. But I was really having trouble like focusing and comprehending. So I was like trying to put the 3 pieces together, and I was like, I don't know how they go together. So that was weird, in the middle of the night, I like woke up once ago and I thought my daughter was like sleeping next to me. So I was startled, but that sometimes, can happen when you're sleep deprived. You kind of are like, oh, are they here? Did I fall asleep on the couch? Am I in my bed? So I thought, oh, that's just like normal. I'm tired. But it kind of progressed to, I remember trying to write a message on my phone, like a quick email to a friend. It took me an hour. I was just like sitting there and I could not figure out how to write this message. So like basically like my mental functioning really slowed down, and I couldn't, my husband, I remember him saying, I was like, oh, what should we get for dinner? And then he's like, oh, I can read your mind. I think you want to get Mexican food. And I was like, oh my God, he can read my mind. That I really, like, I remember being like, oh my gosh, that was so weird. I don't know but he can really read my mind. And I was freaked out. So those were some of the weird peculiarities that was just like, felt weird and off. But then of course it became terrifying once I was paranoid and thought there was this crime that was occurring.
In the weeks leading up to this, there are well checks for your baby, right? And I'm sure you were going to all those appointments. Did you ever have the opportunity to have somebody check in with you and your health at those appointments? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, unfortunately, no. I went to, because my daughter was losing weight, I was at the pediatrician's every day or every other day doing weigh-ins. And all I heard was, feed your baby, pump, feed her every 2 hours, which meant I needed to breastfeed, and then I needed to pump, and then I need to feed her the expressed pumped milk, and then wash the pump parts, and then basically you have a little 20-minute gap to, maybe stuff your face with some food and then start again. And I felt like I couldn't keep up with that slog. Every 2 hours was, I think, an impossible task for a new mom. I don't know why any doctor would recommend that. I wish they had said, try to supplement with some formula, give yourself a break. I didn't hear any of those messages of like, but the thing that's the most important is that mom's okay. I didn't hear that. I heard, feed your baby, like do whatever you have to. She's losing weight. This is a crisis and you need to keep doing this. So, that was not helpful. And unfortunately, the OB who might have, who would have noticed symptoms or checked in with me and at least given me the survey, the Edmonds survey to see if I had any risk factors. I was in the hospital at that 6-week appointment. I missed it. It was too late. I think it can catch postpartum depression, but when it's postpartum psychosis and it's emergency, and also this disease that frankly, I think no one's ever heard of. Maybe you've heard it in the context of some terrible tragedies, but certainly, that's what's hard too. That's why I share my story, because there's so much shame around this scary word, postpartum psychosis. And I was too out of it. Frankly, the person who's experiencing is too out of sorts to be able to advocate for themselves. They need family to help. And certainly I felt like if I told anyone what I was experiencing, they would take my daughter away. I was scared. And that was not at all what I wanted. It was a situation about me that really had nothing to do with my relationship with my daughter.
Yeah, I feel like we get put into this really bad spot as new moms where I was given those questionnaires at all the well checks for my first child, and I lied. I just flat out lied on them.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to think I'm a bad mom or that I'm not enjoying being a mom, even though I flat out wasn't, and I had that same fear, and it wasn't even as severe as what you went through. I still had that same fear of, if they know I'm a bad mom, they'll just take my baby away. Like, it would be very simple. So that's part of the reason why I love having these discussions, because I don't think anyone's talking about how easy it is to fall through the cracks, and the checks and balances that seemingly exist actually don't, and they're not helpful. And I completely agree with you that I think the first line of defense for this type of situation is friends and family who are around the person and around the new mom. And they're just not well equipped to handle it, to notice it, to deal with it. And so I want to talk a little bit about your husband. I know from reading your story that he was the one that did finally kind of take action and get you some help. Mm-hmm. But up to that point, did he ever say anything to anybody else or to you? Like, I think something's up with Lisa. She's not herself.
Yeah. He did. And basically the interesting thing with my story is like, everything should have lined up to create this like great idyllic scenario after birth. My family was nearby. Honestly, almost every day I had someone, a grandma or, my mom or my stepmom. I had someone helping me with the baby. I had time to rest because I had the grandparents and the support, but that just made me feel like more and more inadequate and more like a bad mom. So that was what was so interesting. It's like, people around me and they're like, oh, like she has so much support, she must be doing okay. So then I felt even more isolated and like, no, I'm not doing okay. And like, I should be, the shoulds are killer when you just think I should do this, I should do that. And I think for my husband too, there was some signs, I guess, for him that he thought maybe it was postpartum psychosis, but everyone was afraid to admit that because they thought, what does this mean? And I saw one psychiatrist before I was hospitalized and was prescribed Zoloft for postpartum depression, and that didn't help. And then I was prescribed another medication for anxiety, but again, that didn't help because what I was experiencing was this psychosis, and I really needed a different medication. So it's tough because even when you get help, you have to find a right path. Thankfully, I found a mom support group, which was super helpful. I was the most healing of all, was to connect with other moms that also had these experiences.
Was that group online or was that in person where you were?
Yeah, so I did a couple different ones but they were in-person programs at hospitals nearby.
I'm kind of hearing that through my interviews, that those who find something like that in person, that seems to be really helpful and really healing. And unfortunately, like, you're in a really populated area, and so those
Yeah,
groups exist. And unfortunately, I don't think
yeah,
they're, very well known in a lot of the
yeah,
rural areas. So I'm glad that that existed for you, and you were able to get some help.
yeah. But I think, in the absence of in-person, like also just having honest dialogue with other moms. And I would say, advice for first-time moms, like see a therapist when you're pregnant, get a baseline of where you are and have someone that knows you so that if you are in a crisis, you can reach back out easily. So I think that can be super helpful. And then I think also I underestimated how important it is to connect with moms that have kids the same age as you and that are also first-time moms. Because that was too, like, I connected with some of my friends shortly after giving birth, and they were having their second. And then they figured it all out. And I was sitting there going, I don't know what's going on. I feel really inadequate. I can't even show up on time. And I'm barely dressed. And they've had already figured it out because it is easier the second time around. It has different challenges, but the great mystery of it all isn't there anymore. So I think, connecting with someone else who has a baby within a few weeks of you is so valuable. And that can be, over text message, that can be online.
I love that. I love that suggestion, because I know you were nervous before even deciding to have a second child.
Yeah.
Are you going to go through this again? What is that experience going to be like? Perhaps you were more prepared, but still what you went through was certainly traumatizing, to say the least. So
Yeah.
walk me through that decision to have another child and how that process went for you.
Yeah. So, the process, I continue on in therapy. I think that that's invaluable. Thankfully, I was able to wean off the medications and felt good and healthy, but the therapy I've kept on because I just felt like that was really helpful. And so I created a plan with my therapist to really, have different scenarios laid out. So I just did a lot of things differently from, we had a night nurse every single night so I could sleep for 4 months. So that was, that is not, I know that's not an option for everyone, but for me, I was like, if this avoids a traumatic crisis that then, keeps me from working for a year, or 6 months or whatever, I'm like, that's actually worth the investment to make sure that I don't kind of fall off the rails. So, we had my nanny for my older daughter, and we also had, night help. My husband was off of work for 3 months, whereas last time it was 2 weeks. I mean, that made a lifetime of a difference. And I also wrote a book while I was pregnant called The Wise Mama Guide to Maternity Leave, and talked a little bit about these things that, you all of a sudden you're on maternity leave and you need to decide that just getting, a shower in for the day is a win. Give yourself a gold star for that, not thinking you need to accomplish all these things. So I just kind of slowed down and tried to, enjoy it and kind of remove a lot of the rose-colored lenses and mile-high expectations I have of myself. So that made it a more positive experience. But in terms of, actually trying to get pregnant, we were like, okay, we're going to get pregnant. And then I had 2 miscarriages. So, best and, try to plan. And so it ended up being a longer journey to have baby number 2 than I thought. But actually, I felt like it gave me some extra confidence in how resilient I had become, and that I could manage something like, the miscarriages were being pregnant and then not being pregnant. So it was a hormonal influx that was not fun and it was hard, but I managed them. So that actually made me feel better about being able to manage the experience postpartum. And I think too, as you can see by what I'm saying, when you have a hard time, you learn to reframe everything and just figure, you go, all right, this happened. What am I going to do about it? I could cry about it, or I could decide to turn it into something good. And I've tried to do that. And it's helped a lot.
That's great. Yeah, it definitely seems like you've
Yeah.
bounced and have made the most positive
Yeah.
experience about it. So that's good. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
I love that you're sharing your story to as many people that will read it and hear about it as possible. Any last advice for maybe somebody who might be listening that is pregnant, thinking about becoming pregnant, and in terms of preparing for the postpartum portion of being a mom?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that remembering like you're not alone in this experience. Like 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 new moms experience a maternal mental health disorder. It's actually one of the most common complications of childbirth. And so realizing like this has nothing to do, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. You're not a bad mom. It's just sometimes something that happens. So not blaming yourself, but just going and getting help. And it is, you know, even the most severe case like mine, it's so treatable and it does get better. So, reach out to someone you trust and tell them. And then, it's even, and I've heard too from a lot of new moms, they're like, oh, I don't want to get help because then I'm going to have to be on medicine and then I can't breastfeed. Like, actually, there's plenty of different and holistic options, and cognitive behavioral therapy, just talking with a therapist, has been highly effective. Same with mom support groups. So don't pigeonhole yourself into thinking there's only one, treatment solution, or there's only one way to approach it. Like, find a therapist, start there, and you're worth it. And the faster you get better, then you can be there for your baby and your family.
Dig it. Yep. If mommy feels good, then everyone's gonna feel good.
Oh my gosh. Amen. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you to Lisa Abramson for joining me today. Tune in next week where we will hear from Lisa's husband, David, on his experience of being a new dad and having to watch his wife experience postpartum psychosis. I've linked to Lisa's book, The Wise Mama's Guide to Maternity Leave, in the show notes, so head to thisisparentingpodcast.com and go check that out.